Cool. Well, before I get started, I'd just like to give a massive, oh my goodness, sorry about that, a massive shout out to my two amazing supervisors. Civi Walter is one and Mark Jerry was the other one. They were in my corner throughout the full dissertation process, the research project, and always readily responding to my extensive messages and emails, and always available to set up a meeting whenever I reached out. So yeah, it was a real team effort doing this project, and I'd also be remiss if I didn't shout out Adam Petway, who we brought onto this project at the terminal stages. He's done stints in the MBA. He's got a very diverse skill set, biomechanist, strength and conditioning practitioner, and he brought a lot to the table in terms of the methodology and contributed to the editing and the review stages as well. Do I just click? All right, here we go. So, what we looked at was lateral change direction ability in New Zealand National Basketball League players, and we were interested in examining the test-retest reliability, looking at absolute relative reliability, and then we want to explore this link with on-court lateral performance via an on-court proxy. So our first step, we wanted to break down and examine the physical demands of basketball, and we took to the literature, and it became very clear that basketball athletes had to be proficient in a very broad array of physical parameters, biomotor abilities, but particularly on defense, these defensive players are required to translate their mass within the frontal plane, shift their mass side to side in order to stay in front of the ball handler, contest shooting, and passing to teammates. This is particularly evident in defensive ball screen situations where not only do they have to be quick enough to stay in front of that ball handler, occupy space defensively, but they also have to be strong enough to be able to withstand the contact and curve from the screener. And typically these screeners, the people setting the screens there, are your bigger players. So they've got a lot of inertia, they're pretty tough to move around the court. So it's a very demanding situation within the context of basketball, and has huge implications both technically and tactically within the context of defensive basketball. As such, this could provide strength and conditioning practitioners, coaches, with pretty important information and diagnostic, prognostic information to facilitate making informed decisions with their players. So our next step, we took to seeing what was out there in terms of change of direction measures. It became very apparent early on in the process that the agility t-test, both the traditional and the modified t-test, as well as the lane agility t-test, these were the most popular both in the literature and used anecdotally by practitioners in the field. There were two principal issues with these tests. First was that the high intensity meters and the distances that they were performing these different modes of travel do not actually reflect the distances exuded by these elite players on the court of play. And the second one is you're reducing a very complex, multifaceted ability, which is change of direction ability, to one absolute metric. So when you look at the time, it's very hard to discern as a practitioner if they're fast or slow because of the linear sprint capability, the reverse backpedaling, changing direction side to side. And we were ultimately interested in this lateral change of direction event where they slide, perform a shuffling maneuver, and then accelerate their mass back through that starting position. So we came up with a test. This is the 2-2 shuffle. 2-2 because they shuffle 2 meters, then they change direction, they go back 2 meters. It's very scientific. But this is what it looks like. We've got Tev here. He actually performed the fastest we have on record to date. Pretty aggressive, short action. The typical strategy here that Tev's showing is they'll perform an initial push step, they'll go into a penultimate plant, and then they'll accelerate that mass back through the starting position. Typical times are around 1.15 seconds. Our slower players around 1.4 seconds per side. And with this, obviously, we can isolate the change of direction event laterally and look at the motor travel shuffling, but we can also compare side-to-side differences as well. So we had our test. The next thing we needed was some proxy to gauge and kind of rank this ability to this on-court lateral performance, which was very challenging, and it was still nebulous within the literature of basketball. So This is where Adam really came in. We initially came up with the defensive win shares, which to me I was really excited about off the bat. When you look at the statistics and its definition, it's a very complex and advanced statistic, which is why I just put up a whole bunch of equations there. But essentially what it says is it's the credit attributed to a player based on their ability to prevent the opposing team from scoring. So for me, looking at the relevance of lateral change direction performance in the defense of basketball, I thought this was perfect. I actually did all the stats, everything, wrote out the manuscript, and then Adam came in and he said, I don't think this is a good metric because it's influenced by factors tactically, such as teammates, the quality of opponents, and therefore it's not actually representing the player's ability to translate their mass effectively within the context of defensive basketball. So we went to total steals instead, collected throughout the course of a season. And I just want to say neither of these metrics are perfect. The test is not all-encompassing. It's not showing all the overarching skills and ability required to change direction laterally, and nor is total steals, nor is defensive win shares capable of capturing the full picture of on-court lateral performance within this context of defensive basketball. This just served a much broader purpose, which to see if we could find some commonalities between fast and slow shufflers, and if we could show direction in a small population. So what do we find? Reliability, intraday, test-retest design. We looked at time as our outcome measure, which we thought was acceptable because we'd reduced all this noise in the assessment and all of these confounding factors that we found that we thought were there with the agility t-test, the lane agility t-test. We looked at differences side to side and evaluated excuse me, the relative and absolute reliability. We used a intra-class correlation coefficient, 95% confidence intervals, and a coefficient of variation. Based on our predetermined thresholds, this would be, I guess, defined as being acceptable, right? It's above an ICC of 0.8. It's below a CV of 10%, which in sports science literature has been deemed as reliable. However, in some settings, this may not be acceptable. If you're interested in very small changes in performance, which is what you are ultimately interested in with elite athletes, an 8 or 9% coefficient of variation may be too large to be confident in those small changes in performance. So getting that down under 5% for high performance setting may mean that this test is not warranted for a testing battery in those elite settings. Further to that, you've got to look at the 95% CIs, confidence intervals, and to accurately interpret this data, you would have to say that the reliability is actually, there's a broad range there. It's actually moderate to excellent. So basically all this means is that this test can be considered as reliable between left and right limbs, for left and right limbs, dominant and non-dominant limbs. However, it's not overly sensitive to small changes in performance. So, as well as testing the reliability using the intraday design, we wanted to look at differences between our fast and slow shuffle performers. So we applied a median split analysis, looked at what were some of the common denominators, commonalities, and differences between our two groups here. So our fast shuffle performers, they tended to accrue more total steals throughout the course of a New Zealand National Basketball League season, and they also tended to be shorter. So there are a couple of explanations for this. The first one is that when you actually look at the position of the players within that fast group, they actually tended to be guards, and guards by nature are going to be shorter, so that's reflecting part of that height difference. Guards also have more opportunity based on the demands of the game to get more steals, so that helps to explain why these faster people have more steals. And also based on the limb length, guards we put forth that might actually have a bit of a mechanical advantage based on the angular impulse and momentum relationship, the distribution of the mass away from the hip. So, in conclusion, high measurement fidelity, it's absolutely paramount. You need to have the accuracy and precision. You need to understand what they are, what the limitations of your tests are. And when you're in high performance settings, you need that high fidelity because you're making very high performance decisions to put athletes in the best position possible. We believe our findings have corresponding implications, direct implications on the interpretation of these results to on-court lateral performance and helping to identify these commonalities between groups and showing direction in this specific population. And for us, at least, it's helped stimulate a little bit of a critical thought process around how we can start to scale this into trainable menu items and not just assess this critical capacity, but develop it as well. So it's actually under review at the moment. Quite excited. Hopefully it gets published. Although I have a lot of respect for everyone in here that's published literature now. It's a very slow, grinding, horrible, but very rewarding process. So yeah, thank you so much. That's it.